Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Hank Gonzalez. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. And last year, our group at Harvard started the Harvard Nader campaign to try and build the anti-war, anti-corporate alternative in the elections. The corporate media says that this is the most important election of our lifetime and that there's no room for Nader. But last Thursday's presidential debate highlights that we already know who's going to win the election in November. The winner is going to support the war in Iraq. The winner is going to support the Patriot Act, support tax cuts for corporations, support NAFTA, the WTO, corporate globalization, support a $447 billion a year military budget. They're going to support the failed for-profit healthcare system. They're going to support, and they're going to deny same-sex marriage rights, which is a civil right for gays and lesbians. And the winner of the election is going to be either George Bush or John Kerry. And the losers, again, will be working people, people of color, women, not to mention the people in Iraq. And so, despite this, the corporate media has accused us Nader supporters of being impractical. And in that case, we'll be joining all the impractical people who ended the war in Vietnam, not by supporting pro-war politicians like Bush or Kerry, but by building an independent movement in the streets. And so, after 30 years of failing living standards, rising violence around the world, I think it's a good thing that millions of people are willing to make a stand and vote for an alternative. And so I think that we need to keep building a movement after November to try and build an independent political party, a party that represents the millions and not the millionaires. So if you're interested in finding more about that kind of activity, you can check out our group, Socialist Alternative. We'll have a table out back. Also, the Nader campaign after this is going to have some literature on 12 Elliott Street. You can check that out. And now it's my job to introduce Professor Sunshine Hilligus, an assistant professor of government at Harvard. Professor Hilligus joined the Harvard government department in July 2003. Her current research examines campaign effects and voter decision-making in the U.S. presidential elections. So ladies and gentlemen, Professor Sunshine Hilligus.
I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Ralph Nader back to Harvard University. Mr. Nader is a graduate of both Princeton University and our own Harvard Law School. And he has a long history of consumer advocate and as a consumer advocate and social critic. He's perhaps most fondly known for his work as a public interest lawyer, criticizing industry and government, beginning, of course, with his 1965 book, Unsafe at Any Speed. Mr. Nader will forever have a place in history for his role in a number of consumer protection measures, including motor vehicle safety laws, the Safe Water Drinking Act, the creation of the EPA and OSHA, just to name a few. But it is perhaps Mr. Nader's history in electoral history that is of most interest to us today. As you are all well aware, as a Green Party candidate in the closely contested 2000 presidential race, a razor-thin contest in which just 500,000 votes separated the winner, George Bush, from the loser, Al Gore, Ralph Nader received 2.9 million votes, including 97,000 in the state of Florida, in which you're aware that the winner, George Bush, won by just 537 votes. We will never definitively be able to say, to answer the hypothetical question, what would have happened had Ralph Nader not been in the race? It's something that many of you have asked, that the media have focused on. We will never be able to answer that question definitively. But pundits, activists, as well as academics have largely concluded that Al Gore would have won the election had Ralph Nader not been in the race. My own research, based on a panel survey of some 29,000 Americans in the 2000 presidential election, reached the same conclusion. Although Mr. Nader's campaign had made an impressive effort at attracting young people, at mobilizing on college campuses across the nation, the vast majority of his supporters were people who would have voted had Mr. Nader not been in the election. No more than 25% were newly mobilized voters, according to my research. Probably a bit of disagreement between Mr. Nader and myself. But perhaps more interesting from a political science perspective, my own perspective, were the dynamics of Nader support over the course of the campaign. Mr. Nader can speak with great detail, I'm sure, and with great experience about the incredible barriers to minor party support, to overcoming barriers, both institutional and psychological, within the American political system. So institutionally, things such as getting on the ballot in a number of states. Psychologically, voter concerns about a so-called wasted vote. These are things that regardless of where you stand on his candidacy, are of interest to the electorate. My own research found, for instance, that more than 70% of individuals who supported Nader at one point over the course of the 2000 campaign ultimately got cold feet by Election Day, either by voting for a major party candidate or staying home entirely. We don't know yet what Mr. Nader's impact will be on the 2004 presidential race. There is little doubt, though, that all eyes are turned towards Ralph Nader. And if it's any indication, the media coverage suggests that people's minds are still on the 2000 race. In 2000, when Ralph Nader made the announcement in February that he would be joining the presidential race, in the back, squeezed into the back of the 18th page of the New York Times, there was a 331 little blurb about his announcement. When he made this announcement almost exactly 4 years later that he would be joining the 2004 presidential election, the New York Times had a front page article with 4 times the amount of coverage, and it received front page coverage in almost every paper across the land. So I want to, again, thank you for the opportunity to introduce Mr. Nader, and I want to thank him for taking time out of his busy schedule to speak with the Institute of Politics Forum. So please join me in welcoming Ralph Nader to the JFK School of Government.
Thank you very much, Professor Hillegas and Mr. Gonzalez, and thank you all for coming. I always marvel at auditoriums at Harvard, at the business school, and here it's one way, they're structured in such a way that it makes speakers look up at you. You're growing up in a period of American history that is utterly shameful, where even the progressive left has demonstrated its ability to engage in unconditional surrender. It's as if the corporate right and their Republican allies can bring the left to its knees by making the Republicans so bad and drawing the Democrats closer to them through identical contributions from the same commercial sources. That makes the left adopt the least worst strategy, which isn't really a strategy, it's a surrender. What we're seeing here is unprecedented in American history. The left usually is the harbinger, the pioneer of so many social justice movements. It doesn't worry about least worst strategies the way they're worrying about them now. And the least worst strategy has a mantra these days. It's called anybody but Bush, leave Kerry alone, make no demands on him. We've checked the major environmental, minority, anti-poverty, labor, consumer, and other groups that support the Kerry Edwards ticket. None of them make any demands on him. They're so frightened by Bush that they have given the Democrats a free ride. But there is no free ride when it comes to corporate lobbyists. They make demands on Kerry every day. They make them by the sheer force of their power, a kind of silent, enduring ultimatum to the Democrats. They make them by their contributions. They make them by getting into the inner circle of Kerry, corporate advisors, corporate campaign consultants, and corporate financiers. They make them by year after year of incorporating the Democrat Party in the future designs of the corporate supremacists, which have turned Washington, D.C. into corporate-occupied territory. The level of myth now in academic studies about our election process has never been more intensive. The level of veneer camouflaging our electoral process by the mass media has never been more redundant. If you look at the system and compare it with even Western Europe and Canada, we have the weakest structural democracy in the Western world. We have an electoral system where a person who comes in second becomes president of the United States. We have an electoral system where multiple ways of eroding people's right to vote, certain people, such as African Americans or Latinos, in Republican-dominated states, where their disenfranchisement, where people can be designated ex-felons and deprived of the right to vote, even though they're not ex-felons, where ex-felons who have been rehabilitated or who paid their debt to society can be stripped of their right to vote, where precincts can be changed by way of their addresses without adequate notice, where ballots themselves are deliberately confusing, and there's no sanction. Secretary of State Catherine Harris was not reprimanded, she was not fined, she was not prosecuted, she was rewarded. She's now in Congress for doing the bidding of the Bush family, starting with the governor, Jeb Bush. Now, one would think that an analysis of the two parties would be realistic enough to award them with the assertion that they are a principal threat to our democracy. They are proxies for giant corporations whose lobbyists have taken control of every department and agency in the federal government. There is not one department or agency in the federal government over whom the overwhelming power does not come from the corporate system. That includes the Department of Labor, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, not to mention the consumer regulatory agencies. This is so obvious that it can be documented with the Latin phrase, res ipsa loquitur. Who's the dominant power of the Department of Treasury? It's the banks and the financial industry. Who's the dominant power over the Department of Defense? It's Lockheed Martin and what Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex. It's not just that they have lobbyists swarming over these departments with no effective or only very minor civic opposition. It's that they place their executives in high positions in these departments. It's that they have hordes of lobbyists and political action committees smothering Capitol Hill, which we now call Wuthering Heights. The drug benefit bill that passed last December was almost a total victory for the drug industry. It included over $500 billion of subsidies to the drug industry over the next 10 years. It included a prohibition on Uncle Sam negotiating volume discounts with drug companies for the drugs Uncle Sam is paying for. It included 650 full-time drug industry lobbyists, over 535 members of Congress, spending about $200 million. Pretty good investment. As Will Rogers said back in the 30s, Congress is the best money can buy. Indeed, even the best money can rent. In every department and agency, we have seen not simply the usual clientele lobbies, not any kind of feigned pluralistic balance and counterbalance. We have seen a takeover of our government by increasingly fewer giant corporations that have no allegiance to our country or to any country other than to dominate them or abandon them as they see fit in terms of their scurrying around the earth looking for the least cost dictators or other regimes under the corporate globalization system, a transnational autocratic system of governance that they have heaped on the countries numbering now over 140 signatory countries. Now notice, People who support one party or another desperately magnify the differences. How else can they support them? But it's important to discuss the convergences of the Democrat and Republican parties. On major issues, aside from differences of rhetoric, the following issues are on the same table. They're on the same table, Republican and Democrats. They are not taking on the massive military budget that now consumes 1/2 of the federal government's operating expenditures, even though we have no major enemy left in the world. Just think of all the needs in our country that are being drained because the money is going into more aircraft carriers, more nuclear submarines, more weapons to add to an existing arsenal of the US government that can blow up the world 300 times and make the rubble bounce. Neither Howard Dean, nor John Kerry, nor Dick Gephardt challenged the military budget during the primaries. Off limits. Corporate globalization is off limits. Both parties support it and want to extend it. A shocking relinquishment of local, state, and national sovereignty. All treaties eat into national sovereignties. This one took the biggest bite in the history of our country, WTO. The issue of Iraq is now convergence. Look at the New York Times today and watch William Safire mock John Kerry as he welcomes him to the neocon world view. Despite differences in tactics, John Kerry voted for the war, and he wants the war to continue to victory. And he said enough in the recent debates to indicate that it's going to be a very bloody victory. Neither party has an exit strategy. Neither party has gone even as far as Eisenhower, who, running in 1952, said that he had a plan to get us out of the Korean War, and he did. The convergence continues into the area of corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, a subject that's rarely studied at Harvard University, much less Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School. The corporate crime wave of the last 5 years alone has drained or looted trillions of dollars from millions of workers, pension holders, 401k possessors, and small investors. It was not a minor bank robbery. And here at the Kennedy School, you have the world's leading expert on computerized billing fraud and abuse in the healthcare industry, who told me a few months ago that the General Accounting Office's estimate that 10% of all healthcare expenditures are drained away by computerized billing fraud and abuse. That is $165 billion this year, $1 billion. That was the low end of an estimate that could reach $400 billion. $400 billion. His name is Malcolm Sparrow. Anybody know Malcolm Sparrow? Huh? No media drives to his door, with few exceptions. He only can show how hundreds of billions of tax dollars are being drained away from being used to cover the uninsured and to provide needed health care because of the greed and avarice of the healthcare industry. Corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, despoiling and poisoning the environment, defrauding consumers, stealing from pension funds, and depleting investor reserves, fully documented by the mass media, fully documented by the business media, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Time, New York Times, Washington Post. Nothing happens. That's the sign of a deteriorating democratic society. That even at its finest moments, the establishment press can expose and expose and expose, and nothing happens. No prosecutions, no congressional hearings with intent to change the rule of law to make it more inclusive, no regulatory action. That's the sign that we do not have the depth in our democracy to respond to even exposés by Fortune magazine, Barron's Financial Weekly, or the Wall Street Journal. When Business Week put on its cover, September 2000, its famous cover called "Too Much Corporate Power?" question mark, and answered yes, yes, yes in 7 detailed pages inside. And then editorialized that, quote, corporations should get out of politics, end quote, because they're not human beings. They're not voters. They don't bleed and die in Iraq. They're artificial entities. They shouldn't be allowed to participate in politics. And when they polled the American people, even before the corporate crime wave, 72% said corporations have too much control over their lives. When Business Week magazine, full of corporate advertisements, its lifeline to profit, can demonstrate greater courage than the Democratic Party by leagues, by miles, you better get worried, because that's what's happening. The convergence continues in the area of corporate welfare, which is hardly studied at universities. The hundreds of billions of dollars of tax abatements, tax holidays, tax havens, handouts, giveaways, free leaseholds of our natural resources, giveaways of massive research and development to the drug industries and others from research done at NIH or NASA or the Department of Defense. The kind of bailouts that we've been accustomed to in the banking industry and the savings and loan industry. You would think hundreds of billions of dollars of corporate welfare to local, state, and national levels would be a differential between the two parties. It isn't. In fact, it's almost the reverse. The only congressional hearings we've ever able to get on corporate welfare was initiated by Congressman John Kasich, Republican, and then chair of the House Budget Committee about 4 years ago. The hearings are in your library if you're interested. Consumer protection is hardly mentioned. Is that a soft issue? When consumers are killed, injured, subjected to diseases by products and toxics and institutional indifference? When they are increasingly unable to get justice in the courts because of the malicious tort reform that has been pursuing the close down of our courtroom doors? Only to individuals who sue corporations, not to corporations who sue individuals or corporations who sue other corporations. They can have their full day in court without the judges and juries being handcuffed by absentee legislators. How far do we have to go to show that the convergence ends up making the concept of choice between the two parties, even fictional choice, itself a fiction? In their lust for monopoly power, the two parties now are carving up congressional and state legislative districts with computer precision so that only one of them dominates the election. So people are voting here in Massachusetts, 60% of your state legislators will run for re-election without any opponent. Is that an election? That's not an election. That's a selection. An election means a selection. That is a coronation. And it's 40% nationwide of state legislators. At the congressional level, almost 95% of House seats have been redistricted or otherwise into Republican or Democratic-dominated districts. The voters have been disenfranchised. There is no longer a fiction. There is only the incumbent party. Now, when you hear this, I can guarantee you by my prior experience that your metabolism has not gone up one iota, because we've become numbed by the disintegration of our democratic society, in part because all of you are going to go into the ruling classes, except for a few rebels and revolutionaries. You're right now in the top 1 or 2% of people your age in the world in terms of your health, education, ability to make a difference, and likelihood of being slotted in by virtue of your diploma from Harvard University into the upper levels of the oligarchy and plutocracy. So why should you be worried? It's working very well for you. Harvard Law School is nothing but a high-priced tool factory for corporate law firms. It was when I was there, and the price has gone up very substantially since in terms of tuition, in terms of what brand new law school graduates who don't know what a process server looks like, bringing down $120,000 a year, or $130,000 a year. You see what I mean by slotting into the oligarchy and plutocracy? What is their socially redeeming work when they work for Ropes Gray or Cahill Gordon or Covington and Burling or any of these giant corporate law factories? I was at an airport in Tampa just before the first hurricane came, and I had time to spend just sitting there. I went and bought one of these nutrition bars for $2.80. And I went to the cash register woman. I said, "That's a pretty high price. They must pay you a good wage." And she was a middle-aged woman, and she gave me the saddest look and said, "They start us at $6 an hour." $6 an hour is just a little over $11,000 a year, which is what a brand new law student makes in a month. It doesn't seem to bother the liberal intelligentsia that the differential in wealth in this country is destroying our society. When 47 million full-time workers, 1 out of every 3, are making less than $10 an hour, Walmart wages, $5.50, $6, $7, $8, $9 an hour before payroll deductions. No way one person can live on that, much less a family. The whole history in America of wage slavery and the struggle against wage slavery in the 19th and early 20th century, defined as earning wages you can't possibly live on, is now come full circle. And many of these people work for companies whose chief executives are making $7,000 an hour. $7,000 an hour, every hour throughout the year. And they have people, single moms, working for $6.50, $7 an hour before the expenses of getting to work, like a secondhand car and an insurance company. This country is full of liberals incapable of any social indignation. It's full of liberals who have attained their own status in life and feel pretty comfortable about it, estranged and distanced from the raw material of poverty and desperation and destitution and sickness without insurance coverage that's sweeping our country. We're the only country in the Western world without health care for all, without a decent minimum wage, without benefits, without decent public transit, without paid vacations, regardless of whether you are a member of a labor union or not. We are a society that is told every day that we're number one when we're no longer number one. We're 17th or so on infant mortality. We're about 15th in terms of wages, other countries in the world. We're the world's greatest debtor, when in 1980 we were the world's greatest creditor. The level of consumer debt per capita is number one in the world. We have more people in jail per capita than any other country in the world, if you want to be inclined to demonstrate where we are first in the world. We have by far the highest percentage of child poverty in the Western world. The poverty definition by the Department of Labor is crazy. A family of 4 is not poor that brings in $19,000 a year. A family that cannot earn $40,000 a year before payroll deductions and income tax is poor in terms of the basic necessities of life. I'm laying down this series of predicates because I want to excoriate the liberal intelligentsia for the way it's misbehaved and surrendered in this campaign. The very idea that the only campaign, the Nader-Kamala campaign, that's grinding itself throughout the country against enormous dirty tricks by the Democrats and big lies about Republicans supporting us, the fact that this campaign represents a great deal of the issues and policies and priorities of the liberal intelligentsia, and they are making their best effort to scuttle it because they believe in the mantra, anybody but Bush, leave Kerry alone, make no demands on him. How's that for surrender? Make no demands on him? Make no demands on him, environmental groups, civil liberty groups, peace groups, anti-war groups, labor groups, minority groups, make no demand on a party that's turned its back on the very constituency without which it cannot win any election, even one for dog catcher. Make no demands on Kerry and the Democratic Party, while the corporations are not so squeamish, pulling the Democratic Party more and more into their iron grip, more and more into not challenging many of the major issues that the Democratic Party was once known for, pulling them in such a grip that the Democratic Party cannot even come out for an authentic living wage, a single-payer health care system that gives people full choice of doctor and hospital and provides for adequate quality and cost control, that they can't come out for a revision of these autocratic pull-down trade agreements that are subordinating non-trade issues like environment, consumer and worker rights and progress, that they cannot come out against this slavish adherence to the Sharon militarization and brutalization of the Palestinian people when there is a broad and deep Israeli peace movement, never gets invited to Washington, one that can put 120,000 people in a square in Tel Aviv protesting the Sharon policies toward the Palestinian people. And the Democrats can't even make that distinction. A peace movement has been working for years for a two-state accord with their Palestinian peace counterparts. A peace movement in Israel that represents former generals, former Air Force pilots, former mayors, members of the Knesset, rabbis, professors, literati, ordinary people. And they can't even invite them to Washington. They turn their back on them as if they're pariahs, including that famous declaration of courage by 1,000 Israeli combat reserves and officers and fighters who said they will never again fight beyond the 1967 borders, that they will defend the borders of Israel to the end, but the territories are not Israel. Those are their words. And then in a courageous phrase that is on the website seruv.il.org, they made the following statement, and they're paying for it. These are the soldiers and the officers. We, quote, "We will no longer participate in any action that dominates, starves, expels, and humiliates an entire people," end quote. Does it take that much courage in this country to stand up and have a U.S. government think for itself? There's far more freedom in Israel to criticize daily in almost every forum the present military approach to the Palestinians, but not in the U.S. government and Washington, D.C. Does it take much courage for the Democrats to move for electoral reform, runoff voting, proportional representation, same-day voter registration, public funding of public campaigns? We're dealing here with a serious breaking point that is not being communicated to many liberals. Now, I'll end on this note because I'm getting a signal that we need to have a discussion, which I welcome. Those of you who want to recess from soundbite journalism and want more details, you can visit our website, votenator.org, for more elaboration. But in a political system that does not make the split between ownership and control a political issue, we own the public airways, the public lands, the labor pension funds, the research and development, control neither of it. A system that does not engage half the voters who don't even bother voting. A system that allows our airways to be trivialized and occasionally, when they pay attention to elections, to focus on such matters as the horse race and tactics instead of the substance and the necessities of the American people. A system that ignores completely the need to expand the tools of democracy that are too weak and way out of date for people to negotiate the political system. And a system that ignores utterly any recognition of internal reform is a system that needs a jolt. It needs to be challenged. In the 19th century, there were enough voters who did not go for the least worst between the Democrats and the Whigs or Democrats and Republicans when it came to the abolition of slavery or the women's right to vote or the labor unions. They supported third parties which never won national elections. But guess what? Their issues were finally adopted by one or both of the two major parties. And so I say to the people who have written me letters in recent months, I say to them, recover your nerve, make your demands on Kerry. If you don't make him better, he's only going to get worse. And those of you who believe that you should vote your conscience and never vote for candidates you don't believe in, and those of you who believe what Eugene Debs once said, when he said it, he said, I'd rather vote for a candidate I believe in who loses than a candidate I don't believe in who wins, because eventually, if you allow candidates to lose and lose and lose, that's the only way the candidate's agenda is ever going to have a chance to win in a two-party rigged system. And I'll leave you with what Eugene Debs said near the end of his career. He said, you know, the American people can have anything they want, except they don't seem to want anything at all on election day. That's something to ponder today in terms of the reduced expectation levels of people who should know better, who go through their political life saying, I'm going to vote for the least worst, instead of asking, why doesn't our political economy give us the best? Thank you very much.
Get to the question and answer session that I know that so many of you are interested in getting to. We have 4 different microphones. I think there is already a line at each of those. Please remember that the best questions are those that are brief and end with the question mark.
Where do you want me to start? Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Is this on? Okay. Mr. Nader, I'm a big supporter of what you stand for, and in 2000, I definitely would have voted for you. But now, I look at what happened with the election and how Al Gore would have won if you wouldn't have ran. And I realize that, if people like Al Gore would have been president, that we probably would not have gone into Iraq. And, I just want to ask you how you deal with the fact that over 1,000 people have died in Iraq because you ran for president.
I could have asked for a better question. Do you take courses in government here?
Not at the Kennedy School.
But you take it, right?
Well, not right now, but next
You're
semester,
going to?
yeah.
Okay. Look at the pre-election day dynamics. For example, consultants to Gore told me that by pushing Gore to taking more progressive rhetorical stands, he got more votes. Remember when he took on the drug companies and the oil companies, the insurance companies against the advice of his vice presidential mate, Joe Lieberman? He got more of an appeal. So whatever you do, don't look at the final tally. Point 1, Gore won the election. He won it nationwide. He won it in Florida. It was stolen from him. Point 2, the fact that it was stolen from him is also the responsibility of a non-vigilant Democratic Party in Florida. They should have watched before, during, and after. Point 3, don't pick out one what if. If you take statistics, you know what happens to you in terms of a grade if you just take one variable? What if Tennessee? What if Arkansas? What if the mayor of Miami didn't sabotage Gore and go off to Madrid when he could have made one call and got thousands of votes out because he had a tiff on some local issue with the Democratic Party? What if Gore didn't have 3 personalities on 3 debates? What if Gore didn't try to mimic petrified wood as he went around the country? He should have landslided this bumbling governor from Florida, from Texas, with a horrible record. who couldn't put 3 sentences together. Okay, so I'm just trying to show that you've got to take more variables into account. Let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say between now and November, we repeatedly give the Democrats 12 issues that they can beat Bush with. And let's say you agree with most of that these are important issues and they're vote-getting issues, like authentic living family wage. It's long overdue. And they refuse to take these issues. And last Wednesday, we actually had 12 of our staff dress up in white waiter coats with silver platters like this and march down the street to the Kerry Edwards headquarters. And the label of the march was 12 Ways to Beat Bush. And there were 12 issues. It's all on our website, votenator.org. And they refused to take it. Do you exonerate them? Do you exonerate? See, I'm trying to get you to think in a little bit more complex manner. Go ahead.
Mr. Nader, thank you for being here tonight. I have a question about, sorry, I have to frame it in my head. I'm just wondering how you explain that, well, let me see, sorry. It seems to me that even when there is no one candidate that really responds to your expectations, you vote for the least worst, or the one that gets closer to what you would like to be. And in the end, I'm wondering if the electoral college here votes more for a charismatic person than for morality and for sound policy. So you know your electoral better than me, so what do you think is a reason?
Well, first of all, lots of good people don't run for office at state, local, national level because politics become too dirty, groveling, too much money raising in return for commitments that they don't believe in, that the corporate interests, for example, demand from them. Like there are 9,000 political action committees, and they're very tailored. There's the auto dealer ones, and the insurance agent ones, and the banking ones, and the weapons industry ones, and so forth. So that screens out a lot of people. And that's one reason why I ran in 2000, because I never wanted to run for elective office. I'm a full-time citizen advocate. I build citizen groups. I think the political system has to be rooted in civic movements and move forward on a parallel track. But when Washington shuts down on us, when the corporations take over and put for sale signs on Washington, D.C., and shuts down on civic groups who can't get anything done anymore, they can't improve their own country anymore. And when this signals to a lot of people who would otherwise run, don't bother. If you're not for sale, you're not going to make it. Then this is a real crisis. The point is that liberals do not have a breaking point. If you do not have a breaking point when you're going to break with the party you've been voting for, if you don't have a boundary where, after taking into account a lot of issues, you say this far and no further, then you have a ring in your nose for the rest of your electoral life, and you'll be led downward. So the system breeds out and intimidates out its talent. And in Western Europe, for example, they couldn't believe that an actor, a grade B actor, would be elected president. Or someone like Schwarzenegger, who took 2 biceps and something else to the State House as governor of California. I mean, it's just inconceivable for that to happen. Now,
but
maybe
that's
it will.
exactly the point of my question.
Yes.
Is, balancing thoughtful policy and morality versus charisma in the campaign.
Charisma, you mean how would one balance charisma?
No, what in the end seems to be the most important when you prepare yourself for running for office, for presidentials, sorry.
Well, I don't like charisma. I mean, charisma is a manipulative, extremely historically, is a devastatingly manipulative, controlling process. I mean, who cares whether someone has a good smile and is charming? Would you go to a dentist who didn't know
But
how
it
to work?
seems that it works very well.
Yes, it does work.
Yeah.
It works because, as I said in my book, The Good Fight, which I urge all of you to read as students, even if you don't buy it. There's an appendix that says how to become a super voter. And the technique of charlatan politicians or shallow politicians is to first flatter the voters so they can fool them and then they can flummox them. And that reduces the voter to a defenseless human being. Oh, gee, look at, flatters. And there are ways to avoid that. And there should be a campaign, at least one campaign, the presidential race every 4 years, that does not go around flattering voters. We do not flatter voters. We hold them to a much higher standard, namely the same diligence they have as sports fans.
Mr. Nader, thank you for coming and speaking to us. I'm Michael Gould-Rotowski. I'm a sophomore at the college and son of a steelworker. I want to ask, do you really believe, Mr. Nader, that you're in a position to condemn the American left and to speak of our aspirations as your own? Because in the last 4 years, when we've been out in the streets and working people were fighting and their children were being sent off to war, where were you? We were at the front lines of that, but we didn't see you there. And so Eugene V. Debs also said, as long as there is a lower class, I'm of it. But by saying that you know better than the mass movements that actually are made up of working people that are fighting for the issues of working people, and it's as if you've just set yourself above them. So I'm asking Mr. Nader who it is that you're representing right now.
Well, I'm not including your mass movement. The way the left is described as the liberal intelligentsia is what I was referring to. I was in the rallies, not all of them, obviously. Number two, we're the only ones who organized 13 constituent groups representing millions of people to make last-minute demands on Bush and to see Bush, all of which he rejected by not even answering them. And we had key organizers in the anti-war movement. So you're not up to date. What you're trying to do is exactly what I'm talking about. There is a very minimal blue-collar movement in this country because the trade unions are not leading it. The trade unions have become part of the liberal intelligentsia in Washington. If you go to their offices on 16th Street, the main occupational hazard is to be caught in the corridor at 4:45, if you know what I mean. So what you represent is exactly what we're trying to promote. We're joining picket lines around the country, most recently with nurses who were shut out. And unfortunately, the workers are being insulated by their leaders who are for Kerry without any demands. Show me one union that is demanding, open up right now, up front, to repeal the cruelest anti-union law in American history after the Wagner Act was passed, which is Taft-Hartley. You can't even get the FL and the unions, and we've tried in many ways on 50th anniversary, et cetera, of Taft-Hartley, to come out to repeal Taft-Hartley, which is blocking over 42 million workers who surveys show want to form or join trade unions, most of them making under $10 an hour. So please excuse yourself from whatever characterization I made of the liberal intelligentsia, because you're clearly not part of that unconditional surrender. And may your ranks multiply.
Mr. Nader, my name is Andy Frank. I'm a senior at the college. I'm an environmental science public policy concentrator. The environment is an issue that I care a lot about. In fact, when I was still in high school, I saw you speak at a leadership conference in Whitewater, Wisconsin. That helped spark my interest. However, like many of us around here, I'm feeling very betrayed. Specifically, you say in your platform that you would put the United States on a pace to meet 30% of its total electricity demand from renewables by 2020. John Kerry has pledged to meet 20% of total energy demand by 2020. It's not that big of a difference. I've done the models, 20% is plenty. I guess my question is, do you care about the environment or do you care about Ralph Nader?
No, I don't think he means it. I've been hearing that from the Democrats. They've been saying 20% every 10 years. They just keep pushing up the 10-year limit. He doesn't mean it, because if he meant it...
But you're demanding things from the Democrats.
If
so
the Democrats, really mean it, here's what they would do. They would launch a major solar energy conversion campaign as part of their political campaigns. You tell me, have you heard Edwards? Have you heard Kerry talk about the only practical way to deal with environmental issues, geopolitical issues, and on-the-ground political economic issues is rapid conversion to solar energy, which means breaking the power of the fossil fuel industries
It's not true.
and nuclear power industries. They just don't, they don't
I've
believe
studied
it.
this, Mr. Nader, that's not true.
What's not true?
That you can meet all the energy needs by converting to solar energy. It's not feasible.
I didn't say all the energies. I'm saying...
Majority.
No, I'm saying we have to convert over a period of time to energy efficiency and different manifestations of solar power. Now, if you don't know anything about the different manifestations of solar power...
I do know, sir.
Okay. All right. Now,
You could talk to
just
my
by way of
professor.
helping me out, give me the 5 major forms of solar energy. Go ahead. Just help me out. Because you're saying that it cannot fulfill our needs, so help me out. Give me the 5.
Well, number one is photovoltaic.
Okay?
I mean, the other one you could do directly into water heating. You can
Solar thermal.
Solar thermal, however you
Okay.
want to call it.
Go ahead.
There's also, if you want to classify it this way, geothermal with energy tucked into the...
Okay, you can put that in reserve, but okay, go ahead.
That's
Go ahead.
fine. I mean, you can do a lot of different things, but the point is...
No. I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is this huge abundance of wind power, solar
But it's not
thermal.
economically feasible.
It is increasingly economic. If you talk to utility executives and you read what Amory Lovins and others have documented, you will see that is now, for new generating power, the technology of choice. That's what they would prefer. Wind power is coming in Western European countries, in other countries, very rapidly compared to other forms of new energy. But I'm just trying to convey to you that the sun provides huge sources of energy, which technology now is reducing in terms of unit costs. And as you know, it doesn't have the diseconomies that coal and nuclear and fossil fuels have either. So read up on it.
Right, it's not the only solution, though. Thank you.
So let's try and move through it. We have a long list of questions, so let's try and move through these.
Hello, I'm Tiffany Nagano. I'm a senior at the college, and I'm also a government concentrator. There's all this talk about why you should not run, but you are running. And so my question to you really is, who are you trying to get to vote for you, specifically a profile or a particular mindset? Who was it that you were trying to get to vote for you in 2000? And beyond the people that you're trying to get, who do you think are the people that are voting for you, both in 2000 and perhaps in 2004?
Well, I believe people should vote their conscience. And I think if you had 1 million people in a stadium and you said, should the American people vote their conscience? Most of them would say no, yes. But then when they start voting, they're hereditary Democrats, hereditary Republicans, tactical voters, least worst voters, because they don't trust other voters to vote their conscience. And they want to be with winners. We are all prisoners of a 200-year-old electoral college, winner-take-all, two-party dominated system. It's time to break out of jail. So, no. So, in answer to your question, we want to get votes from everywhere. Last poll I saw, we're running 12% among people your age. We want to get voters from all constituencies. Why not? We're not going to pigeonhole ourselves. I don't believe in a one-issue voter. A one-issue voter makes herself or himself an immediate prisoner of the candidates. You know, if you come up to a candidate and say, I don't care about everything else, but pro-choice is the most important thing, that's how I'm going to vote. You're a prisoner of that politician, because the politician either ignores you and goes to the pro-life, or says, yeah, I'm pro-choice, and then you don't evaluate the politician on 25 other important things, he gets a free ride. But we're not doing that. That's why I can't answer your question in that kind of targeted demographic way. But I do certainly want to appeal to the younger generation. The younger generation is dangerously turned off politics. How many times people your age have come up to us and said, we're not turned on to politics? And I say, look at history. You don't turn on politics. Politics is going to turn on you in a very disagreeable way. So we're trying to appeal to the younger generation, which has higher expectation levels, sees through the sham and the hypocrisy and the phoniness, and asks impertinent questions of the politicians. That's who we're trying to appeal to if you want to ask us our number one appeal.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Nader. My name is Evan Armstrong North, and I'm a student here. And for the last 2 years, I've been studying the development of the international financial system. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that, with the assessment that our country is at a breaking point. But I don't think that you realize quite how serious it is, both in the United States and on an international scale. I believe that the evidence is quite clear now that we are at the beginning of a gigantic international financial collapse. And the implications for the United States are quite mind-boggling. The East Asian countries have reduced their purchases of U.S. Treasury securities. It is going to be impossible to finance the deficit. The trade deficit is going to collapse, and with it, American living standards in the relatively near future. I'll try to get to my question quickly.
That's a very important point he makes. And
at the same time, we have in office a group of neoconservatives who are pushing the world toward perpetual war. They've outlined war plans in North Korea, Iran, Syria. They're pushing for a war with China over Taiwan. And I'm wondering if you don't think it's more important to get these people out of office as an emergency measure by supporting John Kerry, because we know the precedent in a prior financial collapse, what happens. People like the neocons use it as a precedent for war, and we face that danger now. So, Mr. Nader, I ask you if you don't think it's more important to vote for Kerry and eliminate this threat of perpetual war.
It's more important for our campaign to help defeat George W. Bush, to expand the opposition to Bush. There's an impression with people like yourselves that almost all our votes come from the Democrats. Zogby just made a point in late August. Half of our votes now, as of late August, are people who never would vote. The other half are split 50-50.
That may be, but you could throw the critical difference, and you could possibly save the world.
No. Let me put it this way.
I'm not kidding.
I appreciate...
This is serious. This is deadly serious for our generation.
First of all, under both Democrat and Republican administrations, you had IMF, World Bank, huge trade deficits under both administrations. As you know, they're running almost $500 billion this year. And more of our debt is owned by China and Japan and Western Europe. And if they do pull the rug out, as you indicate, could be the case, if they see a softening or excessive debt and deficit, it could be quite calamitous. And that is not being discussed by the two parties. We go around, and when we're interviewed by the press, if I started out the way you did, and it was very important, I'd be past my 6-second soundbite. So we do talk about it in the context of corporate globalization. But be very careful about exonerating the Democrats here. And when it comes to Alan Greenspan, they're bipartisan. When it comes to the IMF, they shovel out the money.
But when it comes to perpetual war, they're not. Well, there is a difference.
No. Well, I've been working a lot harder than you have to defeat George W. Bush, so give me a little indulgence. Will you? No, if you look at our website, you'll see the 12 issues we continually convey to the Democrats. I don't believe in unconditional surrender. If you do, you're going to end up with a pro-war, pro-Patriot Act, pro-corporate globalization, pro-corporate welfare, pro-taxes for the rich being cut, pro. So you have to ask yourself, what do you buy when you get Kerry if you don't make demands on them? Yes. Because that's where the questions are coming from. You're proving my point. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Nader. If you were to be elected president, you would likely meet a lot of resistance in the legislature. So how would you or any other president, what would be as specific as possible, the political strategy for getting progressive legislation passed?
Well, if I were elected president, there'd be such a mass mobilization that it would have retired a lot of present members of Congress and put some pretty progressive people in there.
Yourself or any other president?
People, On that point, I've told Daschle and Pelosi repeatedly, you lost the House in 2002 when you should have won it by 100,000 swing votes. You lost the Senate by 41,000. You're going to win or lose the Congress by a fraction of a percent in 30 or 40 districts. Let's collaborate so the spillover vote, which we could encourage to the progressive Democrats running as challengers. Because we have no congressional candidates on our ticket, and they're not interested. This is a party whose depths of decadence and surrender have not been thoroughly plumbed yet. So the other point I could get, let me answer you bombastically at a conventional politician. Were I elected president, I would use the bully pulpit to the full range of my presidential reach and the mass media. And above all, I will deploy 40 years of experience writing, hassling, lobbying, challenging, networking, and mobilizing members of our legislative branch of government. You have my word.
Mr. Nader, those in the media and Professor Hillegas claim that a lot of your impact on this election and on the 2000 election is that you did then and you may now give it to George W. Bush. I disagree because I think a lot of the impact that you have is on people in this room, on the audiences that come to see you. I came as an ardent Democrat, I leave as one, but you've certainly spoken to me on the issues that are important to me and made me realize how much more liberal our party needs to go. That said, don't you think it would be more effective to come to these types of forums, to travel the country, to speak to young people around our country and around the world about these issues as a citizen, not as a candidate, because you turned so many Democrats off because we see you as such a threat. That's right. I mean, if you were to leave this race, which I know you won't do, but if you were, then while you might not garner as large of audiences, those audiences would be so much more willing to listen and not to try to confront you on the policies that we obviously all agree on.
Do you believe that people have an equal right to run for office in the United States of America? Yes or no?
No. I think that I don't believe so. Now you approach
Very
us
candid. That's what's behind all of these intimations of do not run.
That's not true.
Do not express free speech, assembly, and petition inside the arena. Do it outside the arena. Well, I played that game for 25 years. And I went around in '84 with 14 seasoned staff showing the difference between Dukakis and Bush and Mondale and Reagan and so on. Nobody's interested.
The Democratic Party needs to play the game to you now and expose you.
And basically, now what we're seeing here, my friends, this is very serious. Because I've gone through your train of thought for many years. Longer than I should have.
Wait, man.
And let me just suggest this. Look up the definition of political bigotry. And political bigotry basically is the attitude by the two major parties that they own the voters in this country, that they belong to them, and then everyone else who might challenge them should shut up and get in line because it might spoil the party. You cannot spoil a more spoiled political system.
Mr. Nader, my name's Jay Jurdy. I'm a sophomore at the college. I'm also Lebanese American like yourself, and I had a chance last summer to see your family's home in Lebanon and Arsoon, and I thought I'd give that plug to you. And I've always looked up to you, but this coming election, getting Bush out of office as an Arab American means so much to me because he's the one who put in the Patriot Act. He's the one who's taken us to Iraq. He's the one who's in bed with these neoconservative Christians who think 90% of the country is damned to hell, essentially. And I'm just so confused because I hold you in such high regard as such a great consumer advocate. And I think, and everyone here has learned something from you, and I'm just wondering, what would it take to get you to pull out of the race last minute?
Some Lebanese American. Number one, when I hear you say that, I sort of have a flashback. Imagine a scene in 1840 where someone said to the abolition candidate, "Can't you please withdraw? Can't you just leave it to the Democrats and the Whigs?" or go down every third party. It's that there were enough people who didn't say least worst when the stakes were much bigger. Don't kid yourself. The stakes were much bigger in 1984. We were 40 minutes away from mutual obliteration with us and the Soviet Union. Don't start exaggerating this there in terms of security issues. The stakes were slavery. The stakes were disenfranchisement, 50% of the American people, women. The stakes were the brutalization of millions of workers in dungeon-like factories. There were enough people who didn't say they're going to go the least worst to the two parties on these issues. They went for the third party. And that's what started the social justice movements. And they never won elections, but their issues won. So I want to repeat that. It takes repetition. Second of all, if you're going to vote for Kerry, ask yourself the following. Two questions. Are you making any demands on him to pull him in the direction of what you think is the best interest of the people? Because the corporations are pulling 24 hours a day. And second, what's your breaking point? At what point do you say, in the cumulative evaluation of this party over the years and now, enough is enough, and I'm not going to take it anymore? If you don't have a breaking point, you've basically surrendered your political integrity to the least worst choice through which you can be manipulated forever. Because there'll always be a least worst party. Every 4 years until kingdom come, there'll be a least worst party. There's no end logic to the least worst attitude. Because 2008, 2012 be the same argument. If Kerry wins, they say, oh, you can't go that, you've got to do Bush, you see? So the key, let me repeat it again, if you're voting for Kerry and you don't make demands on him, if you're anybody but Bush, which is a brain closer, if you're anybody but Bush, leave Kerry alone, don't make any demands on him, you are in complicity with a system that is going to have Kerry lose more votes than he would if you were pulling him in the direction of labor and patients for health coverage and so on. See, there's no static situation in politics, no static situation anywhere.
Thank you.
Shut up. Shut up. Jesus.
We're making plenty of demands on Kerry.
Mr. Nader, thank you
And
for coming
Bush.
tonight. Okay, my name is Shankar Duraswamy. I'm a graduate of the college and a third-year student at the law school, or as you so graciously suggested, a third-year tool in the making. You're very good at not flattering your voters. I found it interesting your suggestion that many progressives who support Kerry, who are part of the quote-unquote ruling class, don't really care about the real problems of working Americans because, after all, we all have health care and access to high-paying jobs. Never mind that description could also be applied to you. But many of us do
I'm
care.
a conflict against interest, which I invite you to participate in.
Many of us do participate in that. And the way we participate in it is by recognizing the difference between Senator Kerry's health care plan, which would cover 27 million Americans, and President Bush's, which would cover 2 million Americans, a distinction which you dismissively trivialize. Now, I also support universal health care, and I'm sympathetic to a single-payer plan. But my question is this: when you encourage us to vote for you and to vote our conscience, when you have a purely fantastical chance of actually winning, rather than to vote for Senator Kerry and to vote for results, when he has a real chance of passing that health care plan, aren't you the one who doesn't really care about the problems of real working Americans who don't have health insurance?
Not at all. You would be more accurate if you accused me of not going around the country taking apart before the deprived and damned in this country, unlike people here who are more fortunate, taking apart the Bush administration with a specificity and an urgency that escapes the Democratic Party and their candidates. John Edwards cannot even defend the Bush administration's attack on one of the three pillars of our democracy, first being civil rights, civil liberties. He cannot defend the attack on the civil justice system. And he's a trial lawyer. And he knows how important access to the courts are. And he knows how important having ordinary people who are wrongfully injured or defrauded, having their full day in court before a jury of their peers. And he is not rebutting the day-to-day attack on the tort system by Bush, Cheney, and his cronies. That's just one example. So I want to ask you, how many people have visited our website? Yeah? Look at, see? See how few? Now, I suggested before you render judgments that you visit the website and see all the ways that Kerry could landslide Bush if he and the Democratic Party and his corporate circle don't restrain him from so doing. You don't think 47 million full-time workers who are in wage slavery would not like an authentic, determined presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket to fight for them against the Walmarts and the McDonald's and the Burger King and the Kmarts? That's one reason why they don't vote, because they don't see it means anything to them in their daily lives, the two parties. And I hope you're an exception to what Harvard Law School is trying to do to you.
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm a sophomore at the college. I obviously disagree with the previous questioner. I think everyone should have a right to run for president. But I'm wondering, as a purely tactical consideration, you've clearly indicated that Kerry is in many ways preferable to Bush as a candidate. Why are you holding so many campaign events in states like Florida and Ohio instead of states like, say, Texas and Massachusetts?
We're campaigning. Look at the knee-jerk clapping before you even know the facts. We have campaigned in all 50 states, in states where we've been excluded from the ballot by the Democratic Party's phony lawsuits, harassment, intimidation of our signature gatherers, knocking on doors and threatening them with jail, our signature gatherers. When this story is fully documented, you'll see how disgracefully they performed, in effect, to try to keep our voters from having an opportunity to vote for Nader Kamejo by keeping us off the ballot. So I have campaigned all 50 states. We have a southern tour planned. It's not exactly a hotbed of Democratic support for Kerry. And you're wrong on your facts. I was in Florida, because I haven't been to Florida more than a day or so, in part because that's where the debates were. So I spent 2 days in the Miami area, because 57% of the people want me on the debates, according to the Zogby poll. And I want to highlight what a second-year law student, George Farr, has documented on television recently with his book, No Debates, just how captured this debate commission is. It's a corporation created and controlled since 1987 by the two parties. And the only way to reach tens of millions of people in this country, unless you're a Ross Perot running as a third party or independent candidacy, is to go through the debate commission, which is controlled by the two parties you're trying to compete against. I mean, Western Europeans mock us. We're a laughingstock. This isn't even an official institution. Yeah, the networks cooperate with it, and when they say, we're going to set the bar very high, et cetera, that's the end of more voices and choices, even though poll after poll has showed that a majority of the people wanted me, people like John Anderson, Buchanan, and so on the debates. Anderson actually made one of the debates. But this debate commission even excluded Ross Perot in 1996 after he got 19 million votes in 1992, showing the power of the two-party electoral dictatorship. So I'm not preferring one after another. We're trying to get the most votes. I'm not even on the ballot in Massachusetts because of a lot of problems that I've described.
Well,
and I'm here in Massachusetts. Why am I here in Massachusetts? First of all, it's a Kerry state, and I'm not even on the ballot because I believe in reaching all the people, regardless. Regardless. You understand? Blue state, red state, regardless. You want to have a couple more? Yeah, okay. No, when we have some more, I could stay all night.
Hi, my name's Michelle Sonia. I'm a junior at the college, and I'm an
Yeah.
environmental science and public policy concentrator.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I know that you helped with coming up with the idea of the EPA, and I was wondering what ideas you had for addressing the problems that EPA has been facing with inadequate funding, states not paying attention to its regulations, and Congress continually imposing unachievable deadlines on the agency.
Well, one obviously is to try to strengthen existing environmental groups and to bring organized labor in, because pollution in the workplace, toxics, is taking a terrible toll on worker lives and health. And the second is to try to do what we're doing and build a political reform system that would put real teeth and willpower in enforcing the laws against the silent violence we charitably call pollution. So that's the thing. Any system, whether it's the business marketplace, nature, or the political system, that squelches small starts never rejuvenates itself. It starts decaying. And if business squelched entrepreneurs and small businesses, you know what would happen. And if nature denied seeds the opportunity to sprout, you know what would happen. And we've got to be much more tolerant of small starts. In a way, this is a battle for all third-party and independent candidacies. And it will be continued after November 2 with a major attack on the ballot access barriers. But you need more civic pressure on Congress and the EPA, more mobilization of toxic hotspots where the victims and their families and children are, the way Lois Gibbs has been doing in her group. And you also need a political reform movement. And it's very important. You're not at the peak of your idealism. That was about 11 or 12, you know. But you're going into your 20s. You got 15,000 or so more days, 2,000 or so more weeks before you reach 65. And if you think last week went quickly, you haven't seen anything yet. So this is the most creative decade, your 20s. You may have more judgment, experience, wisdom later on, and certainly you would hope so. But in terms of the vector that you're going to pursue, in terms of your priorities, how you're going to balance your occupational or professional life with your civic duties, how you're going to connect with the rest of the world. Your 20s are the most creative. That's what's going to determine your vector for the most part. Do not waste your 20s trying to get over personal hang-ups that you should have gotten over when you were adolescent years, if you know what I mean. And it's very important that you not allow your expectation levels to be tactically reduced to a level where you can be manipulated and your horizons can be occluded. This is very important. I don't want to hector you on this, but I want to try to drive the point home because it takes great repetition. If you're going to vote for Kerry, now here's what I'm going to ask you. As say you're a Kerry supporter, here are the 5 responsibilities you have, in my judgment. You make demands on them, specific demands, so you can pull them in your direction. And that means you do not abide by anybody but Bush, leave Kerry alone, make no demands on him. Some of the leading intellectuals of the left put out a statement 2 weeks ago where they said that people in the close states should vote for Kerry, even though, quote, we strongly disagree with Kerry on the war and other issues, end quote. These were our supporters in the year 2000. They did not urge people in the safe states, over 32 states, like Texas, New York, Massachusetts, Georgia, either Republican, Democrat, to vote for the Nader-Camejo ticket, which represents their agenda, and does it without sitting in an office, thumb-sucking, does it on the road. And second, they didn't make any demands of Kerry. Now, what signal does Kerry get from these people? Basically, that they can be had, that they have no choice, no alternative, that he can cater to his corporate patrons without being penalized or even intellectually or rhetorically pulled in a direction of the progressive, anti-war, pro-peace, all the rest, labor, environment, consumer, minorities, anti-poverty, etc. agenda. So the first obligation, if you're going to support Kerry, is to make demands on him. The second is not to allow the Democratic Party to abandon the red states. You know what happens when they abandon the red states? They lose control of Congress. They basically spend more money on a Senate race in Pennsylvania than they do in 10 Rocky Mountain states, where populations are 700,000, 1.6 million, 3 million, etc. That's 20 Senate seats. And Democrats we have met in those states, in the South and Rocky Mountain, bitterly resent the presidential ticket, abandoning them every 4 years, which means that all the way down the line to city council and state legislature, the Democrats in those states are getting fewer votes. And there's no farm team supported for future election leaders. The third obligation is that you do something about what's coming in terms of counting the votes. The electronic voting machines, the no paper trail, the software that can be hacked into. What generation knows more about software and its vulnerability than you? We have a society that's mocked by the Brazilians and others. They want to come and be observers and advise us on how to count the votes. And you may lose your favorite candidate if you don't do that. It's already going on in Florida, and it's been written about, and Carter recently alluded to it. And the same people are in place, Jeb Bush and the successor to Catherine Harris. The fourth requirement of the Kerry supporter is to condemn both parties' redistricting, which leaves more and more and more voters with no two-party choice, which in effect abandons half of the voters in this country by the Democratic Party. Because when you play the redistricting game, you're not going to win more than half of them. And that's going to change the composition of the House and Senate as well. And the fifth, and by the way, ask yourself why it is not a sense of the highest political urgency that the two-party duopoly is turning our country into a one-party district. One party, either Democrat or Republican. To me, that's the end of it. You can forget about elections. You can forget about any kind of two-party competition. It's over. And there's no sense of urgency. Your blood doesn't boil. You don't get really upset. An ethnic and gender slur will get you raving angry more than the decline of our democratic society. And that's true of most people who don't connect.
Why are you running in a two-party system? You're helping Cheney.
And the fifth,
you're helping fascists.
and the fifth, look at our website. Look at our website. Look at our website. Stop closing your brain down and incorporate more variables.
Have a dialogue with me. You're helping Cheney.
And the fifth, yes. And the fifth.
Don't run if you don't like the system.
And the fifth requirement, the fifth requirement is you've got to challenge you've got to challenge the Democratic. Oh, no, hold on. You see, this is the political. These people agree with us on most issues, substantive issues. This is political bigotry in action. I'm glad it's being streamed on the website. This is political bigotry in action. This is one of the few times when liberals abandon their civil libertarian positions, when they take that kind of position. You remember. The real test of whether you believe in the First Amendment, which is speech, petition, and assembly, is whether you will defend to the end the rights of people to use it who you disagree with. That's the test. And running for political office and running for electoral office is the consummate deployment of the First Amendment. And I just finish my last point. The Democratic Leadership Council and their corporatists have taken over the party. They have marginalized the good progressives in the party, like Ted Kennedy, Henry Waxman, John Conyers, and others. And it's the duty of someone who is supporting Kerry to constantly oppose and marginalize the Democratic Leadership Council and the corporatization of the party. They have been responsible inside the party for betraying the progressive traditions of the Democratic Party, raising more and more money that indentures themselves to corporate interests, and in the process, losing election after election to the worst of the Republicans at the local, state, and national level. You have Democratic states like New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts nearby with Republican governors. You have a Congress with that. I do.
So thank you for coming to the IOP Forum.
I'm going to make this last.
You can can continue this conversation at 12 Elliott Street. Ralph Nader will be there with campaign literature.
There'll be a book signing across the street at 12 Elliott Street on the second floor at 7:30. Mr. Nader will do a book signing if you're interested. 7:30 at 12 Elliott Street. There'll be a book signing.